a lot of people will say, I forgot. And again, you're telling your brain, quit looking for it, right? And so saying, it'll come to me in a moment, again, gives that suggestion. Okay, it keeps your mind open, and you move on to something else. And as you're in that kind of neutral space in your mind, it'll pop back in.
Welcome to the My Future Business Show, where we get you in front of your best audience and keep you there. Not only are we interviewing the biggest names in business to help you become even more successful, we're inviting you to book your spot on the show to help you grow your business. So at the end of the call, make sure you fill in the interview application form at myfuturebusiness.com/interviews. Hi and welcome to the My Future Business Show. My name's Rick Nuske and I have a wonderful guest with me today. His name's Reneau Peurifoy. He is the book author of Overcoming Anxiety from Short-Term Fixes to Long-Term Recovery. How are you, Reneau?
Oh, I'm doing good. And you did great on the name. It was just right.
Oh, look at that. Because I was sitting there thinking about it. I wonder if I'm going to get this one right. And I did. So thank you so much.
Well, I remember in class, I'd get to the P's on the roll call one first day, and I'd say, that's me.
You're in California, is that correct?
Exactly. It's been nice and warm out here, so it's been fun. Just got back from Tahoe, went up and saw a Shakespeare play, so it was fun.
Very nice. Is it coming into winter up there, or is it just starting summer?
Oh, we're right at the end of summer,
Right.
getting ready to go into fall. But
Yeah.
we have a fairly warm fall. It doesn't really start to get cold till close to Christmas, actually.
Right, excellent. I always like to start off with a bit of a chat about people behind the books and what they like to do in their time away from being an author or inside their business. Share a little bit about your background with us.
Well, I'm sort of semi-retired. I'm still writing and doing some presentation stuff. I'm kind of doing that half of the time. The other time I'm spend a lot of time with my church. So I play 2 services. I play guitar, lead guitar, and play a lot of music. Teach some kids at the church and some adults at the church, and so music and writing and doing a little bit of class work and occasionally seeing people. That's takes up most of my time.
Have you been playing guitar a long time by the sounds of it?
I started in junior high school. Actually,
wow.
I started out on drums. Went to the state fair, saw the Birds play, and said, I think I'd like to do that. So
Yeah. I certainly have tried it, but I'm no good at it myself. In today's call, we'd love to talk about your book, The Overcoming Anxiety from Short-Term Fixes to Long-Term Recovery. Tell us a little bit about this book and how this has come about for you.
Well, I wrote one back in '88 that I've revised a couple times, and it was it kind of became the standard way that we treat people. Back then, it was pretty revolutionary because everybody was just using a kind of a one-shoe-fits-all approach. And as good as it was, about 10 years later, after just working with people and stuff, I realized that it needed something more. Nowadays, they also call it relapse recovery. At the time, I called it short or long-term recovery, and I kind of like that idea.
Mm-hmm.
And it's basically, after you get over it, what are some things you need to do in order to not relapse back into some of the anxiety problems? I worked a lot with panic disorder, and I had some people would occasionally come back after 6 months or a year, and some of their symptoms would start coming back. And so that's when I decided, well, we need to kind of take the next step. How do we get them over that final hump where they don't go back into the panic attacks and stuff?
I'd just like to, for the sake of the My Future Business audience, who are largely entrepreneurs. Obviously, if you have 2 feet and a heartbeat, you have the potential to experience anxiety. Let's go back to the foundations of what anxiety looks and feels like for somebody who may not have actually recognized it before.
Well, everybody experiences anxiety. It's just that nervousness you get before a date or an interview or a big sale call or whatever's coming up. And for some people, you can get sweaty palms. You can get your breathing a little bit, your heart rate starts to go up a little bit higher. Those are common signs that people have. So I think everybody's experienced it, and it just has to do with on a scale. Is the dial going up to 100 or is it just going up to 5 or 10? A lot of the people I worked with, they were having actual panic attacks, and so they would actually have just exaggerated symptoms. I think the easiest way to think of it is think of the most scared you've ever been in your life. For me, it was I was in a car, and this car just about plowed into me, and of course, you pull over, and your foot's kind of shaking, and your heart's beating fast and everything. You're saying, "Whoa, that just about got me."
Yeah.
And then you calm down, you move on. Okay. And for some people, that calming down and moving on is really hard. They'll stay up in that really elevated state. So everybody's had an experience like that, and that's all anxiety is. It's part of the fight or flight response. We're supposed to have that. When danger comes up, it gears your body up. It shuts down all the stuff that you don't need, such as digestion. That's why a lot of times when people are anxious, food doesn't seem to settle right. It turns up everything that you need to run away and or to fight. And that, again, your heartbeat, your sweating, your pupils will actually dilate. Sometimes things will seem brighter. Sounds will sound louder to them. Because again, you want your senses to tune up if you think danger's around. So it's just a danger response, basically.
So you would get this almost like if you've had an experience, you would have some sort of like a trigger for it to return. Is that something that you help people with in an ongoing way through your book?
It can, and nowadays we call it post-traumatic stress disorder, and there's a lot of various types of it. But there's an interesting thing that when you think you're in danger, the things that are going on around you tend to imprint on your mind. So like if you're in a car accident and, the sounds of the car, the crunching or whatever's going on at that time, the lights, that will imprint on your brain. So when you encounter them again, it'll cause this alert response. And that's useful. If you're out in the environment, especially back in the old days when things used to be very physical threats to us. You had wild animals, people, things like that. You wanted to be alerted when danger might be around, a sound or a smell or something. And so that's part of the way we work. And so what happens is that'll start to trigger anxiety in you. So let's say somebody's, I don't know, they've been in an interview situation or something, and they got really nervous, maybe more so than they normally would. And if that happens a few times, now that setting of being interviewed or talking or maybe doing a presentation will start to just generate anxiety because that's been imprinted on them as a danger situation. And if they don't manage it, then pretty soon they can start focusing on the anxiety symptoms. And that's typically what happens. They'll notice the anxiety. Oh my gosh, I'm getting anxious. That means I'm going to blow it this time. And they start to, in their mind, build it up into this big thing. It's like getting ready for an interview. I know I'm going to blow it. Oh my gosh, I don't do interviews well. This is terrible. Why I got to do this interview? Oh my, I'm going to blow it. Pretty soon you get to the interview and you've talked yourself into such a state that you blow it, right?
Yeah.
And it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. So a lot of it's just teaching people how not to do that.
Yeah, of course. So this is definitely in the realm of psychology, isn't it?
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So I've had some pretty traumatic experiences before in terms of workplace injury. In fact, I lost half my thumb and put a 3-inch nail through my spine. And any time I get near fast-moving machinery nowadays, I start sweating, like everything you've just talked about, Reneau. And it's a real fear. How do you help people, recognize that when that's happening?
Well, you recognize when it's happening. Sometimes you don't put two and two together of what's triggering it. So in your case, you've got the idea of spinning machinery is triggering the anxiety. And so what you can do is you can desensitize to that. And part of it is, what happens when this trigger happens, like when you hear the machinery and stuff, it's kind of like you lose contact with the rational part of your brain.
Yeah.
And you start just thinking a lot of negative thoughts, a lot of, you'll probably have some sentences come into your mind or whatever, why is this happening or whatever. And so it's a matter of re-engaging your rational part of your brain, and you'll still be anxious, but what happens is you desensitize over time so that you can be around it. You might have a little bit of anxiety, but it's no longer that overwhelming anxiety. So like in your case, I'd ask you, so when this response happens, we would make a list of the types of thoughts that go on in your brain. And then we would come up with what we call rational self-talk or rational statements that you can use to counter those thoughts. So you got one that comes up frequently when you're in that type of situation?
Oh, look, if I'm around machinery, I think over time it's gotten better. But if I get near like a lawnmower, for example, I almost picture in my mind this high revolution cutting blade, and I actually start clasping my hand because I remember the immediate response after the accident. And
exactly.
then that's what I feel. I can feel that moment in time, and it was a split second when it happened. I can remember seeing myself,
Well, so there's three things you do. First of all, you got to remind yourself that today, this is not the past. That event that happened where I injured myself, that's over. And the present is different now. I don't have to approach that, but again, I'm aware of that. I can step back and I can be safe. And it's also useful to tell yourself, this response I'm having is a normal fight or flight response because I did get injured, and it will get better over time. And as you do that type of self-talk, and as I've already said, you are getting better over time. You do desensitize. But I think it's when you notice that whole thing coming up is recognizing that, today is different. It's over. Yes, I injured myself. It was bad. But that's not going to happen again because I'm aware of that now, and I stay away from things like that. So, I'm safe.
Yeah.
And as you give yourself those types of statements, it'll calm you down.
Yeah.
And you can do some basic things like breathing is really useful. I teach people diaphragmatic breathing, taking 2 or 3 just relaxed diaphragmatic breaths, not the big type of breaths, but you learn to just do relaxed breathing. The military, when they have what they call combat breathing, they'll tell people, breathe in through your nose and expel, and then breathe out through your mouth to the count of 5. So it's kind of a slow.
Yeah, controlled experience.
And you do that 2 or 3 times, and that just kind of calms you down, because that type of breathing actually triggers the what they call the parasympathetic, or the opposite of the fight or flight response in your body. So between the self-talk, doing a couple relaxed breathings, usually that'll help calm you down. And the same thing you can do, like if you have presentation anxiety. In fact, presentation anxiety is real common, and that's kind of related to it. It often starts back in junior high school, because everybody is super aware of what other people are thinking, and peer pressure and all that stuff. And unfortunately, you get in front of a group, it's like you're in front of that 7th grade class or whatever. They getting ready to make a mistake, and kids are going to tease you.
Yes.
So I tell people, okay, first of all, you're an adult now, right? And because you're an adult, most people really don't care about you or what you have to say, right? Or whether you make a mistake or not. They're too busy with their own life, and that's true. In fact, and then the other thing I'll say is, think about when you've seen somebody make a mistake. Do you sit there and ridicule them and laugh? Probably not. You just say, well, that was kind of odd, and then you move on to whatever it is you're thinking about. And that's the way most other people are going to treat you too, especially in a business setting. They're not going to make a big deal out of it. So a lot of it is just, again, controlling those negative thoughts that are kind of like a little recording that goes off in your brain when you're in that situation. So you make a list of what are they, and you come up with rational coping self-statements, and you review them before you know you're going to be in that situation again.
Yeah, that's fantastic feedback. Thank you so much. I hear this and I think about this fear of public speaking. It seems to be an all too common thing, and the takeaway there I think is like you said, people are generally not wrapped up in you; they're wrapped up in themselves. So if we could recognise that before we went onto stage as business owners and entrepreneurs, we'd be well placed to do well.
Yeah, exactly, and of course there's the old thing, which is still true. When you get on, if you have a large group you're talking to, you find 3 people that are friendly, and you look at them, one on the left, one on the right, one in the middle, and you just kind of switch back and forth. So you're not talking to the audience; you're talking to 3 people. And if you pick your people well, they're going to be nodding and smiling, and you just sort of ignore everybody else.
Yeah, that's amazing strategy just there for anybody who's listening to the show. Reneau, we focus on small to medium-sized businesses and beginner entrepreneurs. When somebody's starting up their business and they're quite anxious about meeting that client for the first time, does your book talk about any strategies that they can follow?
There's a lot of strategies that work for everyday anxiety. In fact, taking the one that you're looking at, we call that negative anticipation, or what if thinking, right? People getting ready to go into a new situation, they do a lot of this what if this happens, what if that, what if they don't like me, what if I can't remember what I need to say, what if I make a mistake, what if I do this, what if I do that, and people that are worriers, they'll come up with thousands of what ifs, right? And we all do to some degree, right? But some people are worse than others. So it's like before, if that's something that's true for you and you tend to do that, then basically the strategy is, first of all, you list what are the things that you're really worried about, okay? And then you say, what are the odds that this is going to happen? And of course, the really big worrier is going to say, oh, I know it's going to happen. So you say, well, how many times has that happened in the past? And, well, that's never happened in the past, or it's only happened once or twice. Okay, so the odds are actually based on reality very low. And then you look at, and let's take a simple thing. So what if I make a mistake in what I'm saying? Okay, so the odds are probably good for that, right? I may say something different. So how bad would that really be? Well, it's really only going to be as bad as you make it.
Yeah.
When I first started doing public speaking, I was terrified of making mistakes, right? Or my mind would go blank on what I was trying to say, and then I'd just get all embarrassed. It would just be terrible. And then finally I realized, okay, the strategy I'm going to use is when I can't think of what I'm going to say, I'm just going to say, my mind just turned to jelly, so it'll come to me in a moment, and start off on a new topic. And sure enough, within a couple minutes, what I was going to say would pop into my mind. I would just go back to it, and just realizing, how bad is it making a mistake? So what are the odds? How bad would it be? Well, in this case, if it's a simple thing like that, it's really not that big a deal, and most people are not going to make a big deal out of it. Again, think about when you're in a conversation with somebody and they forget what they're going to say or they lose track. You don't think much about it. No. Especially if they just move on to the next topic. So you need to just come up again with a strategy. Instead of getting embarrassed or apologize, you say, well, I forgot the point I was going to make there. It'll come to me in a moment. And that's an important thing. It'll come to me in a moment, and then move on to another topic. And most of the time, it'll pop back into your brain fairly quickly. Yeah. A lot of people will say, I forgot. And again, you're telling your brain, quit looking for it, right? Yep. And so saying, it'll come to me in a moment, again, gives that suggestion. Okay, it keeps your mind open, and you move on to something else. And as you're in that kind of neutral space in your mind, it'll pop back in. And again, you can do some plans to prevent it, right? So what can I do to prevent this mistake happening? Well, I can go with some notes. I can have an outline. I can have a presentation, so I can, with my key points on it, so that'll remind me what I'm going to say. I can do some practicing. I can rehearse with some people. And again, that plan to manage it if it were to occur, which is, just have something to say and then move on. So basically, what are the odds? How bad? How can I prevent it? What will I do if it occurs? Those are the 4 steps.
I sit here thinking to myself, the one thing that would seem to be obvious is that the more you think about how bad things can be, the more likely you are to attract that outcome.
Yeah, exactly. And so you want to do the opposite, right?
Yeah. Well, it seems so simple, doesn't it?
Yeah. A lot of what I've worked with clients is basically just come up with plans. Here's a funny one. I had a lady once I was working with who was afraid of escalators, right? And so one of her big fears is, what if the escalator stopped and people wouldn't let me off? So we went through the odds. So what are the odds of that happening? How many times have you seen an escalator stop? Well, I've never seen it. So the odds are low, right? How bad would it really be? Would it be like a year from now they would find your bones on the escalator? No, probably not, right?
Probably not. You'd hope not.
So there's nothing you really can do to prevent it, right? No. But we can manage it, right? So if you were on the escalator and people wouldn't move, what could you say or do to move them? She came up with that. I can say, I think I'm going to be sick. And they'd probably get out of your way. So armed with that, she started practicing escalators. And they became no big deal again.
That's amazing. I'd love to explore some of the most bizarre cases, if you could. What are some of the really interesting ones that you've had to work with?
Well, one person I worked with, he had gotten sick on a airplane coming back from Paris, and he was like a mid-level manager, and he developed this gag response. And by the time I saw him, he could only eat like soft food, and soups and something that was very soft. Couldn't eat anything crunchy because he'd get this choking response, right? And he had actually what we call a conversion reaction, and they're not that common, but it's where a symptom mimics something going on in your life. And it turned out he was a short guy, and his dad was military, and he grew up overseas in various countries, and because he was short, most of the places he lived, people would beat him up. And his dad was pretty abusive too, so he was fairly non-assertive. And with his boss, he needed to set some limits, and he couldn't do that, and he was literally choking on his words. And so this was his symptom. Yeah. So we worked on it on 2 different fronts, desensitizing so he could eat, but also teaching him, how to basically speak up for himself, how to assert himself in an appropriate way. And that worked pretty good. And about, 5-6 months later, he came back, and some of the symptoms had recurred. And so, we started going through it and realized that, he he had some stuff he had to deal with an ex-wife, and he was choking on his words again. And so he dealt with that, got the symptoms all under control, and got that dealt with his ex-wife. And he came back about 6 months later and some of the symptoms were starting to come up again. Of course, my first response is, okay, so who is it now, right? And it turned out it was his current wife. He had some limits he needed to set, some boundaries. And so we got that taken care of, and I never saw him after that. So I'm assuming he kind of got the message after 3 times, right?
Yeah.
When because symptoms are always a message you got some business to take care of. I mean, that's all anxiety is. It's just a message you got some business to take care of. In essence, emotions are pretty simple. In fact, maybe I'll just run through this real quick. When I talk to people, I put emotions in basically 3 big categories, right?
Yep.
You have the good stuff, if something good's going to happen to you, and it's all in terms of needs. If a need's going to be satisfied or is being satisfied currently, you get excitement, joy, happiness, pleasure, all that type of stuff. And then we have 2 subsets. One is if there's a threat. And if there's a threat, you get fear or anger. Fear can be anxiety or it can be, panic. Anger can be irritation or it can be rage. It's the same emotion, just how high the dial is turned up.
Yep.
And then the third category is loss. And if there's a loss, you'll get the sadness, depression, constellation of things. So you kind of work backwards. If I'm anxious, that means I'm feeling a threat somewhere. So you just identify where's the threat. Sometimes that's easier, sometimes it's not.
No.
If I'm angry, the same thing. Where's the threat? Is it real? If it's real, I need to come up with a plan to deal with it. And again, a lot of what I work with people is just, okay, once we identify it, let's come up with a plan, because people focus on the symptoms, they don't focus on what's generating it. And once you focus on what's generating it and come up with a plan, that gives you a way to not eliminate, but to manage the symptoms, because now you can use your self-talk to say, okay, I've got a plan. Here's what I'm going to do. Here's how I would manage that. And that helps you to, again, calm down.
Yep. Do you find that there's power in the pen? Do you actually get people to document their plans, or is this simply self-talk? How does that work?
Oh, no. When people are willing to do it, I find writing is great. In fact, like with people where there's a lot of anxiety, like let's go back to the situation where a person has had problems with interviews or presentations.
Yep.
I'd say, okay, later that day or that night, go back in your mind and think about it, and think of what kinds of things you were telling yourself. What were you saying to yourself? And I would look for what we call distorted thinking, and I'd also look for this negative self-talk. And then, okay, I'd like you to write out some challenges for all of that. And then rehearse those next time you're going to go do the same type of activity. And we've talked about some of the negative self-talk, the fearful things that people talk. And there's also something we call distorted thinking. One of the big ones is something called should-must thinking. I have to do, you can be have to. So I should, or I have to, or I must, And, people get really rigid about this. And so identifying your should-must rules and stuff and changing them from I should or I have to I want or I prefer or I would like. Because what happens is when you grow up, you're given a lot of rules, and that's appropriate. You tell kids you have to do this, you have to do that,
Yep.
And then you internalize that parent. And if you live your life by a lot of should-must rules, it's like this invisible parent is following you around, making you do a lot of stuff that you don't want to do. Like when I was at school, I'd use the example, okay, students would tell me, I have to go to school. Oh, I hate to go to school. Why do I have to go to school? Ah, shoot, this is terrible.
Mm-hmm.
I have to go to school, though. And I just say, well, stay home. Well, no, I can't, because if I stay home, I'm going to flunk, and then I'm not going to be able to get the job I want, and so on and so forth. So you are choosing to go to school because you're going to get some benefits out of it.
Yeah.
And the bottom line is life is a series of choices. You make choices based on the good stuff that you want to get or the bad stuff you want to avoid. And when you start saying, it's not I have to go to school, but I'm choosing to go to school because I got some benefits I want to get out of it, it puts you in control. When I have to go to school, again, it's like that invisible parent is making you do something you don't want to do. And that's just part of, becoming more of a grown-up adult, right, is recognizing that I'm choosing to do the things that I'm doing.
I think about this thing called the locus of control.
Exactly.
Is it outside of you?
But with should, must, the locus of control is outside, and when you start using choice, I prefer, I choice, I want, then you bring that locus of control inside.
Yeah.
That's exactly right.
It's amazing. I read about that years ago, and it just automatically reticular activation just came in, and there it was. So,
Yeah. And there's an interesting sub-feature of should must thinking, something called circular why questioning.
yep,
And I used to get that a lot with clients too. They get into this, how come this happened? Why did that happen? For example, maybe somebody treats them unfairly. Why did that person act like that? They shouldn't act like that. I mean, I don't understand. How could they do that? And people will get into things and they'll start doing this circular why questioning. And for some people, it go on for years, right?
yep,
And so I would always say, so why do you think that happened? And they would have a perfectly good explanation. And it's just that it violated one of their should-must rules. So whenever a person catches themselves doing that, how come, why, just in your mind say, how should it have happened? And you've identified your should-must rule. And that's what you then need to go challenge. To go back to our person treating you unfair. So why would somebody treat you unfair? Well, maybe they didn't realize it was unfair. Maybe they're just a jerk and treats everybody unfair.
mm-hmm.
Maybe I did something, right? But anyway, those are all reasonable explanations, and you can identify which one you think happened, and then now, okay, so how am I going to respond? And again, you go back to what's my plan of action? What's my response going to be? Rather than sticking on this drumbeat of how they should have acted differently. I don't understand why they didn't act why they acted the way they did. This doesn't make any sense. Well, it does. It's just that you don't like it, right?
Yeah, it's an absolutely amazing topic. Now, if anybody wants to contact you or access your work, how would they do that?
The easiest place is go to the website. It has links into the YouTube videos. I've got a whole bunch of them up on YouTube now on different topics. So why.emotions.com.
Fantastic. So that's everybody who's listening. I will make that domain URL available for you to access if you're struggling with any of these things. Definitely visit Reneau's website. Reneau, it's been an absolute joy. Thanks for spending some time with me on the show today.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
It's been fun having you on the call with us today, so make sure to subscribe, leave us a comment, share us with your friends, and book your spot on the show. And if you're looking to create your own professional audio or video presentations, then for more details, visit myfuturebusiness.com/shop.